This is a video comparing the pros and cons of conventional management to fractal working. So conventional management is where we divide people into departments. We have sales, production, design, quality, purchasing, etc. divided down into skills. Fractal is where everyone does everything. So each person does a bit of selling and goes and sees the customers, then they come back and they do some designing, some purchasing, then they do the production, then they ship the job out to the customer, they get paid, they do their own finance. They do everything as individual little units. Now I know it's a weird idea, but let's look at some of the pros and cons. I'm going to try and go through this quite quickly as a summary for you. So the first thing is that dividing people down is a bit like an orchestra. So it makes sense to have people who play the violin, play the flute, play the drums, etc. Whereas fractal is saying, if you do that, you've got the bloke on the timpani waiting for the whole symphony just to bang the drum at the end. So it's not very efficient to do that. And also, nobody's got completely control over the sound. They're all just doing their own little bit without seeing the bigger picture. And fractal people would say it's like trying to drive a car when you've got one person doing the steering, another person doing the looking ahead out of the window, a third person doing the brakes, and a fourth person changing gear or something. It's mad. Why would you not drive the whole car yourself? So let's look at what this really means. Well, the first argument in favour of traditional management structures is we know it works. We've done it for years. The counter-argument for fractal is we also know it works because plumbers do everything. People like me as a freelance trainer, I do everything. Window cleaners, they do everything. They do the selling, delivery, finance. So individuals and companies when they first start up usually have one person doing everything. So both are actually established. The second thing is to think that when you're working in a divisional way, you're just part of a machine. So the people in the factory are just doing a job, but they don't really have ownership of that job and they don't see the whole picture. They've probably never met a customer. Whereas with fractal, you actually have ownership because you're the one who went to see that customer. So you actually care about the job you're doing. And therefore you'll make sure the quality is really good and that you deliver on time. And that's what we've actually found with fractal organisations. They have much better delivery on time, for example, and they don't have quality problems. You don't need to have to set up a separate little war between quality and production who've each got ownership of their part and they have to fight over it. They're all done by the same person who cares because they've met the customer. Divisional systems are complicated to manage. We have huge great computers, we have MRP and all those other things. Trying to manage the thing, we have computers, scheduling, stock control, economic order quantities, all that stuff going on. With fractal, not only do you simplify it by just dividing everybody down into separate units who do everything, like a whole bunch of plumbers, each one is doing their own bit, but you actually need no management at all. Not just simpler, but no management required, because each person is self-contained. So I'm a self-contained trainer, I travel around the country selling, training and delivering it, and I don't have a boss. And it seems to work absolutely fine. So no management, much simpler, much less stressful, and of course much cheaper. The next one is that with divisional working, you only need one skill. So it's much easier just to be, say, a salesperson. Learn selling, be really good at selling. And I'm not saying selling's easy, but just master that one skill, or be a really good production person or a designer or whatever it is, or perhaps really great at purchasing. Whereas a fractal, everybody has to learn everything. Everyone has to know about finance and selling and design and production and purchasing and negotiating. The argument, though, is that we all do that in our personal lives anyway. So people do know about purchasing. They know about money, for example, from their personal lives. But there probably is going to be some training required, and not everybody can do all the skills. We accept that. Also, it's safer in your career if you have a specialism. If you're really good at selling, you've got a job for life. You can get a job anywhere as a salesperson or as a project manager. Again, you've got a skill that's transferable. But of course, if you're a fractal person, you're doing a bit of everything. You also have a kind of security because you're more adaptable and you can do anything if you need to. Whereas if you home in on one skill and that skill becomes obsolete, you can be really stuck. Then with divisional working, people have ownership of an area. So the designers have ownership of all the drawings, of the designs. And that's nice to have a feeling that that's the bit that I do within this company. Whereas with Fractal, you're doing a bit of everything. But with Fractal, you have ownership of a customer. You have ownership of that job that you're doing. So you care, in a way, more because you have ownership of that whole thread rather than of a vertical column, of a functional column. Then there's the important argument, I chose to put this in red, that if you divisionalise things, you have specialists who are going to be faster and better. So somebody who only makes parts on a lathe is going to be really good at using that lathe, really fast and really good quality. Or the salesperson is going to be really good at selling because that's all they do. And I think that's true. I think they are going to be faster and better, perhaps, than the fractal person. But the fractal person has the bigger picture. So their argument is that if you're doing the making, the production side of things, you're going to do a better job because you've met that customer. Or if you're doing the selling, you're going to do a better job of selling if you're the one who's going to make it, because you know what's involved with making it, and the customer's going to respect that. Particularly as we move away from simple work to more complicated work and knowledge type work, where it becomes very difficult for the salesperson to know about the delivery of it. So maybe the jack of all trades is actually going to be better at each part because they've got the wider picture. Maybe it's not all about speed or just banging out widgets. Another big argument for divisionalising is that the easier jobs can be done by cheaper people. And then the expensive people are going to do the really difficult jobs. But we can save money getting cheap people in to do the easy stuff. But with fractal working, everyone's doing everything. So you've got quite expensive people who can do everything, doing fairly menial tasks, like, let's say, packaging up products to be posted. Isn't that a waste of a person? But the fractal argument would be, well, for a start, they're going to find cheaper ways to do the packaging because they're going to be thinking about that. But also, we save money not on the wages, but we save money on the fact that we don't need all these extra departments. We don't need purchasing, HR, finance, quality control, production control, project management office, IT. We don't need any of those in the fractal world because everybody's doing a bit of everything. And of course, many of these non-value adding jobs just completely disappear when you get to fractal working. So you don't need production control to coordinate everybody because everybody's doing their own part of their own planning anyway. You don't need an HR department because you don't get grievances and disciplinaries and things happening between people. We've already said you don't need management at all because everybody's self-managing. You don't need a project management office to pull together the projects because everyone's just self-working in their own areas. You don't need quality control because you don't need to check up to make sure that the workers are doing the work correctly because they're already motivated to do that. So a lot of these coordinating type functions completely disappear when you get to fractal work. And the small parts that are left of things like purchasing are done more efficiently by the fractal workers because they have an incentive to do that. So everyone is doing parts of that, but they're going to do it more efficiently than someone who's doing that as their whole job. And in fact, I'm going to just jump now to why that is. And it's because people who do it as their job tend to build a nest and make it into a job. Whereas if you're a fractal worker, there's an incentive to spend less time. So something like packing, you're going to find a quicker way to do the packing. Whereas if you work in the packaging department, why would you want to do yourself out of work? You're going to make sure that that takes you a full day. And it's the same with everything else. So something like finance, fractal people are going to be trying to find quicker ways to do the finance, maybe replace it by an app. Whereas a finance department are never going to want to replace themselves by an app. So the incentive to spend less time on non-value adding tasks. Anyway, going back to my list. We know that with divisional organisations, we spend a lot of time on meetings, people get divided into silos, and we end up with a certain amount of politics that goes on. Whereas in fractal working, there are no communication gaps. No gaps between selling and production, design and production, etc. No gaps between production and quality, because they're all being done by the same person. There can't be a gap, it's all in the same person's head. So we don't need all those meetings and all that politics happening. Now, what about the argument about workload smoothing within a department? So if you've got 20 people in a machine shop, then if there's a lot of work for lathes or something, then you've got plenty of people who can do that. Or if somebody's off sick, it doesn't really matter too much because the others can cover for them. So to an extent, you can smooth out the workload within a department. Perhaps in a design department, if there's more work designing one thing than another, people can help each other with different aspects of that. But of course, if you have difference in workloads between a department, so there's a lot of work in production and not much work in design, then you're really stuck because nobody's going to move between those areas. Whereas with fractal working, people can move between areas. So if there's not much production work, then you have to spend more time selling. And you automatically will correct for that because you'll know that you have to do the selling if you're going to keep your workflow coming in. So you can have workload smoothing between areas when you have lots of fractal workers. It's actually better for smoothing out the work. Now, there is an argument that for large specialist pieces of equipment, you need to divisionalize, something like a heat treatment area or a paint shop or something like that. But the fractal working gets around that by sharing those pieces of equipment. And what you actually do is you rent them per hour. So the company buys it, and then all the people in the fractal system can hire it for as much or as little of it as they need. So that's fine. Weak people can hide when you're in a divisionalised system. So in a drawing office, there'll be some people who are great and some people who are only really getting away with it. And the same in a production area, and particularly in the supporting services. Somebody can hide in HR or finance and not be particularly great. It's not really going to show. But with fractal working, that will be shown up. Suppose I'm really bad at selling or really bad at designing or delivery. I'm going to go bust, aren't I? I'm not going to make any money. So what happens is that weak people tend to not make very much money and they leave. And because the best people are going to be more productive, you can afford to lose a few when you change over. And then finally, with the divisional system, we're quite dependent on specialists. So if one of our key salespeople leaves, we're stuffed. Or perhaps there's a production operator who's the only one who knows how to use a particular machine. And if they leave, we're in trouble. Or if they're ill, we're in trouble. But with the fractal system, everyone's doing a bit of everything. So if one person leaves, it doesn't really matter. Imagine if you had 20 trainers, one of your trainers left, the work will be divided across the other trainers, so it'll be fine. So you're not dependent on any one person. It also makes it easier for you to grow, by the way, because you could just add one more trainer or one more plumber to your system. Whereas sometimes with these other ones, you'd have to add a salesperson and then you need another designer, then you need another production person. It all gets a bit difficult. So the fractal system, like a collection of little cells, you could say, is much more resilient. So that's a quick zoom through all the pros and cons of these two ways of working. And I hope you can see that the fractal system really has all the answers. So I would really urge you to investigate it further. Watch some more of the videos that we're recording.